In this land we have buried pain, but now we plant purpose. From the hands that once held rifles we now grow crops. Our fighters are farmers, our war zones are harvest fields, and our future is green. Burkina Faso will show the world that peace is not begged for, it is built.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to Ibrahim Traoré Era. What if the very people who once brought fear could be the ones to bring food? What if battlefields could become farmland? And what if prisoners and fighters were not locked away but brought into a future with purpose, dignity, and growth? Welcome to a new chapter in West Africa, the rise of Burkina Faso's green reintegration. A revolution of land, labor, and leadership. Burkina Faso, a landlocked country, has battled insecurity for more than a decade. It began with the rise of violent extremist groups in the Sahel. Attacks on villages became common. Schools shut down. Markets were abandoned. Entire regions became ungovernable. Young men, jobless and hopeless, were easy targets. Some were lured into armed groups with promises of food and protection. Others were forced to join under threat. With every new conflict, the number of combatants grew, and so did the prisons. By the time Traoré assumed leadership in 2022, Burkina Faso had over 2,000 detainees linked to extremist activities and an estimated 10,000 disarmed combatants roaming without purpose. Many of them had never received formal education. Few had jobs. Most came from farming families who had lost their land to conflict. Traoré saw the pattern, and he refused to keep repeating it. He asked a radical question: why not make them part of the solution? The idea was bold. Instead of leaving ex-fighters idle and vulnerable, Burkina Faso would retrain them to farm. Instead of letting prisons drain the nation's budget, inmates would work the land to feed themselves and others. Thus the Green Reintegration Initiative was born. The plan was divided into 3 parts: Agro-Battalions. These are special farming units made up of former militants and unemployed youth from conflict zones. Prison farm projects. These are agricultural labor programs for low-risk inmates. Community recovery farms. These are cooperative farmlands where civilians, ex-combatants, and victims of conflict work side by side. Each project was paired with local elders, psychologists, and agricultural trainers. This wasn't just farming, it was healing. Training began at converted military camps. Former fighters were taught how to plow, plant, and harvest. They learned composting, irrigation, and crop rotation. For many, it was the first time they had touched soil in years. Men once feared in villages were now sowing seeds beside women and elders. It was not always easy. Suspicion ran deep, but slowly something shifted. One village chief in the Sahel said, "We watched them plant in silence. But when the tomatoes grew, we offered salt and cooked together." Farmers received stipends, tools, and basic health care. Those who stayed in the program for over a year were promised a plot of land and support to start their own farms. Traoré himself visited one site in Fadane Gourma and told the workers, "This is your battlefield now, win it with your hands." Earlier this month, Burkina Faso celebrated the first national harvest from the green reintegration farms. Maize, millet, onions, carrots, and tomatoes were loaded onto trucks. The produce fed school programs in 14 provinces. Excess was sold at subsidized rates in rural markets. Media outlets shared powerful images. Men in uniforms not holding guns but lifting crates of vegetables. Children lined up to cheer the Agro-Battalions. A documentary crew interviewed a young man named Musa, once a foot soldier for a terrorist group. He said, "I destroyed homes before. Now I grow food that feeds them. I sleep better. I eat better. I feel human again." The harvest wasn't just food. It was proof that redemption was possible. As the Agro-Battalions continued expanding across the country, their impact began to reshape the local economy. Rural towns that once suffered from food shortages saw prices stabilize. Markets once empty began to fill again with fresh produce. Many of the reintegrated farmers were now selling their harvest through cooperatives, and profits were shared within their communities. Villages that had been torn apart by conflict were slowly rebuilding with new schools, water points, and storage centers, many of them funded through produce sales. Agricultural suppliers noticed a shift. Demand for tools, fertilizer, and solar-powered irrigation systems spiked. Businesses opened. Women-led enterprises began drying tomatoes, milling grains, and producing organic compost for the farmers. Traoré's administration also introduced a small agribusiness loan scheme exclusively for ex-combatants who completed their first year of service on the farm. Dozens of small farms were launched this way, each one employing 3 to 5 people. A country once reliant on foreign food aid was slowly moving towards self-reliance. What started as a local initiative quickly caught international attention. Humanitarian groups, African think tanks, and peace-building institutions began highlighting Burkina Faso's approach as a model worth studying. The African Union released a report praising the Green Reintegration Initiative as a homegrown, low-cost, high-impact solution to violent extremism. The United Nations sent observers and began consultations to replicate the model in parts of the Central African Republic. Media headlines in Europe and North America ran features titled "The Revolution in the Soil" and "How Burkina Faso is Farming Peace." Even skeptical voices were forced to admit the results were impressive. Despite international applause, Traoré remained cautious. "Let the results speak. Let the people eat," he said. "We didn't do this for headlines. We did it for our survival." For many of the former fighters and inmates, the transition from violence to farming was more than a career change. It was a return to family. During years of conflict, countless men had lost contact with their parents, wives, and children. Some were presumed dead, others were feared and rejected. But as news of the Agro-Battalions spread, families began to come forward. Mothers visited the farms, children waved at fences, community leaders facilitated meetings between ex-combatants and their loved ones. One powerful moment came when a young farmer named Abdoulaye reunited with his mother after 6 years. With tears streaming down her face, she held his soil-covered hands and said, "I buried you in my heart. Now I can hold you again." The government supported reunions with counseling and reintegration workshops. For many, these emotional returns were the final step in their transformation. New ID cards were issued. Certificates of rehabilitation were granted. For the first time, these individuals were not seen as threats, but as citizens. The success of the Green Reintegration pushed Burkina Faso to rethink its entire prison system. Traoré's administration launched the Rebuild and Reform Plan, aimed at transforming prisons from punishment centers to productive hubs. Under the plan, low-risk prisons were turned into agro-training centers. Inmates worked part of the day in gardens and greenhouses, and spent the rest in literacy, carpentry, or cooking classes. The food they grew not only fed the prison but supported schools and orphanages. Recidivism, the rate at which released prisoners commit new crimes, began to fall sharply. One prison director in Bobo Dioulasso said, "These men used to fight over scraps. Now they debate soil pH and seed rotation." That's real change. The reform also meant better sanitation, mental health services, and family visit opportunities. A system once feared for abuse was becoming a place of second chances. With more land under cultivation, Burkina Faso turned its eyes toward a bigger goal: food sovereignty. Food sovereignty means a country produces enough to feed its people and does so through sustainable, local systems. For decades, Burkina Faso had relied on imported rice, maize, and canned vegetables. But now, with thousands of hectares producing fresh food and processing facilities being built in rural zones, that reliance was shrinking. The Ministry of Agriculture launched the Feed Burkina 2030 initiative. Its goals: replace 60% of food imports with local production by 2027. Establish cold storage units in every region. Export surplus to neighboring countries. Already, Burkina Faso had begun selling surplus cassava and dried tomatoes to Mali and Niger. The country was shifting from aid recipient to food provider. Traoré declared, "We will not beg for food with land under our feet. We will grow, eat, and share." It is still early. The fight is not over. Armed groups remain. The scars of conflict run deep. But in villages once ruled by fear, people now talk about planting cycles and weather patterns. The Agro-Battalions are not perfect. Mistakes happen. Some participants drop out. Others return to old habits. But the overall picture is one of progress, and the idea is spreading. Mali has begun testing a similar model. Niger is sending delegates to learn. Even countries outside Africa have reached out for consultation. Burkina Faso, once seen as broken and unstable, is now offering lessons to the world. At the heart of it all stands a president who saw beyond the bullets, who chose to fight despair with dignity, who turned prisoners into planters, fighters into farmers, and warfields into wheat fields. As Traoré said in a recent speech, "We do not want applause, we want peace." Not the kind that comes from silence, but from soil where something new can grow. And it is growing. This is Ibrahim Traoré's era, and in this era, peace is not just possible, it is planted.